Have you ever wondered about the names we find in history? You know, we often think of them as fixed, like stone carvings, but what if they were more like whispers, changing as they passed from person to person? This brings us to a very big question. It is a question that touches the very heart of the Christian story. Could the man we know today as Jesus have been called something else? Specifically, could he have been known by the name Barnabas? This idea might sound surprising, even strange. It challenges a name that is known all over the world, but looking at how names were used and changed in the ancient world makes this question worth asking. Quick primer, Jesus is Yeshua, a common Judean name, not unique. Barnabas means son of encouragement, a nickname for Joseph, not a birth name. Some early Matthew copies read Jesus Barabbas, that separate criminal's name later fueled mix-ups. This type of confusion was more common in the ancient world than we might think. People did not have official birth certificates or passports. Names could be spelled differently. People often had more than one name. So, we must look at the evidence with an open mind. We need to understand how information was shared 2,000 years ago. It was a time of storytelling, of copying texts by hand, and of translating between languages. In this essay, we will explore this fascinating puzzle. We will not try to prove that Jesus was definitely called Barnabas. That is not the goal. The goal is to understand why someone might even ask this question. We will look at the names themselves and where they appear in the oldest texts we have. We will learn how easily mistakes could be made when scribes copied documents. We will see how stories told out loud could change over time. This journey takes us deep into the world of early Christianity. A complex world. Some even accused him of sorcery. A warlock, worthy of deep, careful conversation. So let us discuss thoughtfully what such accusations meant in context. In that era, critics could label wonder-workers as ghouls, sorcerers, or accuse them of pharmakia, magical arts. Such charges were polemical tools, not courtroom verdicts, reflecting fear of unauthorized power and contested authority. Early Christians countered, these were not spells, but signs, power attributed to Israel's God. Even confusions like Lystra's Zeus-Hermes episode show how onlookers misread charisma, status, and wonder. So, warlock echoes controversy, not consensus. Thinking about this possibility requires us to act like detectives. We must gather clues from old manuscripts and historical records. We have to consider how languages like Aramaic Greek and Latin interacted. Each language had its own sounds and its own way of writing names. A name that sounded one way in Aramaic might have sounded and been written differently in Greek. We also have to think about the people who told these stories. What were their reasons for telling them? Did they want to emphasize a certain message? Did their beliefs shape how they remembered and recorded names and events? These are the kinds of questions that help us get closer to the past, even if we can never know it perfectly. Let us start with the names themselves. The name Jesus is the English version of a very common Jewish name. In Greek, it was written as Jesus. Isus. This, in turn, came from the Hebrew name Yeshua, Yehoshua. This name was incredibly popular in first-century Judea. Think of it like the name John, Michael in English today. Archaeologists have found tombs from that period with the name Yeshua on them many times. So, when we read about Jesus in the New Testament, we are reading about a man with a very ordinary name for his time and place. The name itself was not special at the time, even though it has become incredibly significant since. The name Barnabas is a bit different. It appears in the New Testament, specifically in the Acts of the Apostles. We are told that this was a nickname given to a man originally named Joseph. The name Barnabas is said to mean son of encouragement, son of consolation. This suggests it was a name given to him because of his personality or his actions within the early Christian community. He was a prominent figure, a companion of the Apostle Paul. Bar means son of. Nabas might be related to a word for prophecy or comfort. So, unlike Jesus, Yeshua, Barnabas was a descriptive nickname, not a common given name. To understand how a name like Jesus could be confused with Barnabas, we need to step into the world of an ancient scribe. Imagine a room lit only by an oil lamp. A scribe is copying a text from one scroll to another, all by hand. There is no spell check, no delete key. Every letter must be formed perfectly. It was a slow and difficult process, and mistakes were incredibly common. A scribe might misread a letter, skip a line, hear a word incorrectly if the text was being dictated. These small errors, known as scribal errors, could change words and even the meaning of sentences over generations as one copy was made from another. One common type of error happened because of similar sounds. This is called an auditory error. If scribes copied while something was read aloud, one scribe might hear Barabbas and write Barnabas, or hear Barnabas and write Barabbas. The names sound alike, especially if spoken quickly or with a regional accent. Another issue was visual confusion. A tired scribe's eye could easily mistake one for another, changing a name in the process. One interesting example from the New Testament itself is the case of the criminal freed by Pontius Pilate instead of Jesus. In many modern Bibles, his name is Barabbas. However, some very old manuscripts of the Gospel of Matthew give his full name as Jesus Barabbas. The name Barabbas means son of the Father in Aramaic. This creates a powerful and symbolic scene. The crowd is asked to choose between Jesus, son of the Father, and Jesus, who is called the Christ. It is possible that later scribes, feeling uncomfortable with a criminal sharing the name of their Savior, removed the name Jesus from Barabbas's name. This is a clear example of how a name could be intentionally altered for theological reasons. It shows us that the text we have today may have been, cleaned up over time. This historical precedent makes the idea of another name confusion, like one involving Barnabas, at least plausible. Another example can be found in the records of the Roman Empire. Sometimes, a person's name would change upon gaining a new status or position. A Roman emperor, for instance, would often take on new names and titles upon ascending to the throne. His birth name might fall out of use. This practice of taking on a new, more significant name was common. We see this in the Bible as well. Saul of Tarsus becomes Paul. Simon becomes Peter. Abram becomes Abraham. These are not mistakes. They are deliberate changes to mark a new identity or mission. Could Jesus have been a title or a new name that replaced an older one like Barnabas? We can also look at non-biblical sources. In the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus, there are many individuals with similar names, leading to confusion among historians today. He mentions over 20 different men named Jesus. He also mentions multiple people named Simon, Judas, and Joseph. Distinguishing between them can be a major challenge. If modern historians with all our tools struggle with this, it is easy to see how people in the ancient world, relying on memory and handwritten notes, could confuse one person for another, or merge the stories of two individuals with similar names into one. The historical environment was ripe for such mix-ups. When we look at the early Christian writings for clues, we find an interesting situation. On the surface, the texts are clear. Jesus is the Messiah. Barnabas is his follower. For example, in the book of Acts, there is a strange episode in the city of Lystra. After Paul performs a miracle, and Barnabas with him, the local people mistake them for gods. They call Barnabas Zeus. They call Paul Hermes. Zeus was the chief god. Hermes was his messenger. This is significant. The crowd identifies Barnabas, not Paul, as the leader, giving him the name of the most powerful god, Zeus. Another point of interest is a non-canonical text called the Epistle of Barnabas. This text was highly regarded by some early Christians, and some even considered it part of the New Testament. Despite the interesting possibilities, the vast majority of historians and biblical scholars reject the idea that Jesus was first called Barnabas. The reasons for this scholarly consensus are very strong. The most significant objection is the complete lack of any direct textual evidence. There's not a single ancient manuscript, not one early Christian writing, none that says Jesus was also known as Barnabas or confuses the two. In historical research, arguments from silence are very weak. Another major problem is the timeline. Paul was writing as early as the 50s CE, just 2 decades after Jesus' crucifixion. In his letters, Paul talks extensively about Jesus. He also mentions Barnabas as his contemporary and fellow missionary. He even describes a disagreement he had with Barnabas in Antioch. For the name confusion theory to be true, the name Jesus would have had to completely replace Barnabas across the entire Christian world. Jerusalem, Rome, in less than 20 years. And without leaving a single trace of the change, this is seen as incredibly unlikely. Furthermore, the names themselves have very different origins and meanings. Yeshua was a common personal name. Barnabas was a descriptive Aramaic nickname meaning son of encouragement. It's hard to see how a common given name could be entirely replaced by a specific nickname without anyone noticing or commenting on it. The roles they play in the New Testament are also fundamentally different. Jesus is the crucified and resurrected Messiah. Barnabas is a leader of the church who works to spread that message after Jesus is gone. Finally, the theory creates more problems than it solves. For most scholars, the simplest explanation is the best one: Jesus and Barnabas were two different people, just as the texts say. So, where does this leave us? We asked a provocative question. Was Jesus called Barnabas first? We have seen that the mechanisms for such a name confusion did exist in the ancient world. Mistakes in copying, issues with translation, and the fluid nature of oral storytelling could all lead to significant changes in a text. We have also seen historical examples, like the case of Jesus Barabbas, where names were indeed altered in the manuscripts of the New Testament itself. However, we have also seen that the evidence for this specific theory is extremely thin. The letters of the Apostle Paul, written just a short time after Jesus' life, present Jesus and Barnabas as two separate people. And in this case, the weight of the evidence falls heavily on the side of tradition. Jesus was Jesus, and Barnabas was Barnabas.